Okay. About 4 minutes to open here. I'm going to see if I can make sure my setup's fine. Not looking hot. Pre-market pop. IWM. Nothing huge. $22.32 on GameStop. Closed at $22.26. It's just kind of bonking its head on that ceiling. That's popped as well. Alright, well, let's have to find the inflation data. Because I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be released today. I think month over month, and it's mid-month, so if you guys get that report, if you just post any numbers that you want to post. Don't tell too many people about that, Shaw. It's kind of creepy. Don't do that. My pet turtle is sleeping this morning. No movies reference stream name? We're doomed. Yep. No, I don't know. I don't know if we're doomed. Off topic in the Discord? I don't think that's off topic. Let's see. Today, July inflation rates fall to 2.9, below expectations of 3. Core CPU, computer. Core CPI inflation fell to 3.2%, in line with expectations of 3.2%. So, did they fall or did they just meet expectations there? Because month over month, I'd have to see. I thought last month it was 3. This marks the first month with CPI inflation below 3% since March 2021. Oh, you mean... Oh, I see what you're saying. July CPI inflation, I see. As opposed to core CPI. This price index increased 0.2% month over month in July, matching the 0.2% expected and firming up from down 0.1%. Consumer price index increased 0.2%. Well, so I'm not seeing anything here that looks overtly negative, but I'm also not seeing anything that looks like super positive. It's kind of right where it needs to be. So my main concern on AMC yesterday was we're market's open now. AMC sitting at 5.15% or 5.15. I think the main concern right now with AMC is more in line with like what I'm seeing from a technical standpoint, and the idea of a rush up into close. I'm not a big fan of those kinds of moves. You know, half the time we see that kind of stuff, it ends up being garbage. More than half the time, especially if it like pushes up and it didn't find support. But to the credit of the AMC, operators yesterday. I mentioned this a little bit on the Discord because someone asked me, well, where was the local support? And I'm like, well, I mean, it pushed above 513, and that was the number I had in my mind because I'm thinking like, well, it needed to come up here and then come back down and find support. So to the operator's credit, it came up to 513, pushed high, went to like almost 515 or something, and then came back down and it hit 512. That could be constituted as a check. I don't think it's the strongest check in the world. A single candle on a 6-minute chart isn't really a lot. So it's very speculative, But it was a check, and a check's a check. So, I mean, it did go back and test that breakout. If not very mildly, it still did it. And so, yeah, wasn't the best check, albeit, but it was there. And then we pumped up, and everyone's kind of like, well, what do you think about, in general, like, what do you think about this move at the end of the day? And I can't really say much about it because at the end of the day, your expectations are usually that there'll be some kind of shenanigans. A lot of times at the end of the day lately, we've been getting buy-ins. So we get these high volume pumps, like, near the middle of the day, near the end of the day kind of stuff. And we did this yesterday as well. I think we've done it like every single day. We get these volume pumps. And this is pretty typical. Like, there's no real mystery there. All the stocks in the market do that. And a lot of it has to do with these other funds that buy at the end of the day. It's just sort of I don't know if they're put on hold. Someone told me once that's what that is there's different kinds of investment funds that kind of their orders go in and they resettle at the end of the day. And it's usually the last 15 minutes. I don't think it's some kind of special institutional tactic, although I will say this, is it seems that perhaps that's a big part of our operators' game plan, because they seem to like to milk the end of the day moves with some kind of a purpose. So whether that be like a head fake or a breakout, it just seems to happen a lot on AMC, especially in the last months. So I'm not a big fan of it because you see that high volume spike, you have no idea if that's going to continue in after hours and like keep gapping up. You have no idea if that constituted an efficient breakout. It was a really fast move, really high volume, which is fine. But you really don't know. If sellers responded in the morning with heavy selling, then it's just a head fake. I mean, it's just super simple. And it's not that far away. It's like 5 cents away from being a fake out that then drops low. So it doesn't really make sense to celebrate it. What I responded with in the Discord group just very simply was, look, right now, and you can see it on the chart, right now we're having a lot of trouble getting over like 511. And when this last acted as support was on August 1st. So if you don't see anything else locally, that would be the thing I would be kind of looking at. You always want to default to like, where are your supports? Where's your supply? And right now, like, that's where it is. So every single time we've come up here, and there's been many, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this will be 7. The 7 times we've kind of breached this area or come into this area at 511, we have rejected and sold off. So what does that tell me? Well, frankly, I mean, if you look at the volume, it's definitely a lot higher here than it is over here. So there is some amount of exhaustion going on along this range top. But frankly, like, it looks like a distribution zone, I mean, that's all there is to it. We're not going back above that previous support. Now, here's where I would say this is where things can be perceived as kind of positive, is that if you look at the build out for this reactive move here, which we called the final iteration, because we think that it changed character. And I think it's very evident that we were right at this point, because it's not doing the same thing it was doing over here, which is that 3 top with a drop. It's got a lot of different stuff going on. But clearly it's not smaller than this, at this point. Even if you thought this was 1, 2, 3, it's much wider. So it's not a shrinking iteration anymore. And I really think that this was it here, and it changed character. And we've talked through this a lot. So the one good piece of good news here, there's a couple, but there's a couple pieces of good news here. One is that this is definitely different than what it's been doing. The last 3 times it iterated, it dropped pretty hard after. This one's not having that big drop. The second thing is, you'll note that where I've marked this off is the previous bottom of that iteration. And if you look at ours, our previous bottom on this iteration was down here at the 490s. Okay, now we had made a case that maybe we need to come back to 491. I thought we were going to do it here. Thought we might do it here. Just not going down yet. So I don't know if it's going to flush now and head for it. I even thought maybe here yesterday was an adequate check. So if you were looking at this and saying, well, did we find support above? I still think the answer is yeah. I mean, we pushed up on August 8th and we built out at 494, 495. It's kind of the upper echelon, the upper area of that support region. I don't think it's a very perfect check, but you know, did it come back above that area and is it trading above it? Yes. Does it have to always check everything like over and over and over and over and over again? No. It's just pattern analysis. Typically, it's behavior analysis. Typically, you will see those checks. Okay? So like my expectation right now is if we were to somehow breach up to like 520, that before we go, we would come back down and double check this area right here as support, right? The area between like 511 and 513. Okay? So like for now, I'm like, hey, there's nothing really like horrible about this. It's just that if I'm just looking at this from a glance, you know, it's hard for me to look at this and say this looks really good because it's not been able to recapture that area. So whoever's created that wall there, whether it be an operator or an opposing hedge fund, whatever it is, this does seem to be more like a distribution. So what I said in the Discord last night was that, look, you can't put it out of your mind that that's a possibility because this is like a rapid fire upthrust into this top. And so that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to drop all the way through. It just means that it could be that they're loading up for some kind of a flush. And you can't assume otherwise until you find that support. It's that simple. Now, it just so happens that the area that we need to find that support in is kind of right where we are right now. So we're in a really important spot because, you know, unlike down here where you're kind of like speculating about whether we come back up and test it or we go down, at this point, you've breached it again. Once again, you've pushed out, and this is like the main creek, right? This is the big one right now. So have we pushed out of it? Answer, yes. Daily double. Just kidding. That was a... you guys are like, what? Jeopardy? Anybody? I miss Jeopardy. Do you know what the truth is, though? I'm really bad at Jeopardy. I almost never get it. There's a huge amount of categories that I just know nothing about. And I'm always like guessing. Geography is one of those categories I cannot get my brain around. I stink at geography. Anytime they have geographic categories, I'm like, I lost. If I were on that show, I would lose right then. I guess that's why they study. Anyways, back to what I'm talking about. So 513 is where you need to find support. Okay? I don't know where that number went on my chart. I cannot understand why it does this. Here it is, way over here. Sometimes it just gets in the wrong spot. So my big concern right now is that this is an attempt to flush out the opposite way, which is that they're trying to absorb the buyers' attempt to break out until they kind of exhaust the buyers enough to drop it. I'm not really seeing that case here, you know, with the volume. I'm seeing a lot more buying on this side than I am on this side in terms of just overall volume. So once again, we need to find support right now. And if you drop back below roughly that 511 marker, it is possible we could just do a backup and then continue. So it's not like that's out of the question completely, meaning like maybe it's possible we need to come back to 508 or something, but we would be below the creek. So you cannot take it for granted if it drops below. It would just be a very like uh-oh kind of moment. You know, I'm not saying it's not possible this flushes down and then crosses again and then runs. All kinds of things happen in the market all the time that don't really make a lot of sense. They typically are just when you're seeing those traps. But if this is like a healthy move here, then we would find support. And that's kind of what it boils down to. And if we don't find support here, it's just another attempt to break 511 that's failed. And frankly, I don't see like why you wouldn't come back down and try to make that lower hit. And it would probably be close to 5 if we do flush here. Maybe that 498 area again. I don't know. At that point, you're already underneath it. You might as well come all the way down to 491. I mean, genuinely, I don't care at that point. So there it is. It's sliding through. So I'm not a big fan of the I just don't like it. I just don't like the end of the day pumps. I don't like it when they pump above a resistance. So we got a double top as well, I think. That looks like it's at 518. So now we got another issue, which I think is not really a huge concern until we get back up there, but that is a double top. So yeah, this kind of motion right here just doesn't look, to me, it doesn't look awesome. We talk about those U shapes versus the bouncing shapes. And this just completely flipped the script in the last few days. That low curved motion. So unless it's like an elaborate bear trap where they're trying to make it look really bearish, to me it looks more like a bull trap because it broke and then dropped beneath. We'll see. I don't want to go too far too fast today because the market just opened. It's been 15 minutes. All right. So now same deal here on GME. So it did make a move above. I didn't watch it. You guys were probably like, why aren't you looking at GME, 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 GME? I'm sure you were. Somebody out there was like, what's going on? It's the exact same thing. It's a gigantic candle with a huge amount of volume, and then you're dropping back down and you're trying to find support. And if you can't find support here, then you need to just assume it is what it looks like it is, which is an upthrust. I can't stress enough that while things sometimes don't go the way you think they're gonna go, there's not like a perfect science to TA sometimes. It's like you look at stuff and you're like, well, maybe, But if it looks like something that looks like a head fake, then it may just very well be a head fake, And it reminds me of what happened here with this pump. This is a classic distributive motion where you're pushing higher in order to drop it lower. I remember a long time ago, somebody said that was the dumbest thing they ever heard, that they were like, why would you go higher? Pushing higher is not bearish. And I'm like, well, I hate to say it because it sounds really mean, but that's just the most ignorant thing you could say in the market because it just shows a lack of understanding, which everybody has to learn. It's not like you just come to that knowledge through some mystical dream or something. You're not a chosen one. It's just you have to learn this, is that when they're pumping higher, it's not enough just to pump. You have to find support because a lot of times that's a short covering or that's just a bear trap, or a bull trap where they're trying to drive the price higher in order to re-enter, right? It's basically like an inverted spring. So you have to wait. Now, in the case of what happened back here on the 31st, I don't even remember. I felt like I didn't buy in. So I know that I didn't do anything dumb here because I was waiting. But I remember thinking it looked wonky, and as soon as it came back down, it just immediately slid below. And then it had this hesitation, will it recover? Won't it recover? And you didn't know. and then it just kind of dropped. And I think at that point, the end of the day happened, you know. So they'd already kind of pushed above and then closed below. So that's another big factor in this, is where are you opening, where are you closing. So again, like stressing the importance of being patient and not overthinking something until you're sure. So GME bounced for now. That's good. That's positive. That shows some amount of stopping power, at least for now, right? So if I'm looking at this and I'm like, hey, did it break out? Yeah, it broke out. There's a gap, which is strange, but it broke out. I don't like the gap because that would lead you back below, but it broke out. It came pretty high, pushed resistance all the way up to 22.73. And then it dropped all the way back down to check that breakout. And it did. Where did I get 22.32 from? Why is that so odd and precise? It's just the bottom from earlier in the range. It's where I think that the main bottom is. So if this is a spring, this is this would be like considered a retest or a test of the move back into the range. So you see how important it is to get back above here and then find support, as opposed to just pumping up through it and then dropping. Pumping up through this and dropping is like a huge blech moment where you're going to be at on the skin of your teeth, as they say, right? Like waiting to see what happens, because if you pumped up through this and then drop back down, I mean, that's not great. That's like, oh yeah, this is supply, and you've just created a giant hook back to the top of the range, and now you're going to have to wait and see if it can even manage any kind of support at all. To me, this looks like it's going kind of parabolic, kind of in the way of a rising wedge. So one of the dangers of anything like that, of course, is going to be the possibility that you're going to have a reversal to the other side. And I kind of did this as if it were an S-curve. And if that's the case, it should go decently higher. It should go back up to 23. But there is another element to this which looks more like a, to me it looks more like a wedge, like a rising wedge here. So there's also that. I'm talking about GME right now, if you guys are just listening. So, yeah. Basically, it's a throwback to 2050, which is crazy low, but it's basically returning back to the bottom of the wedge. I guess if that happened, I'd be pretty annoyed, but it could happen slowly. I mean, that would be really, really annoying if it did, but it doesn't have to go that low. I'm just thinking. If you were coming back down, that could be the potential move right there. That's really low, but yeah. So we're definitely on the cusp here, sitting on a cliff. It's hard to imagine it just kind of dropping all the way back down to 2050, but I think it's a sensible target. I don't know what I would make of it if it did it here. I guess it'd have to recross the creek. It's not looking super positive right now. We'll give it some time. It's been 20 minutes, but it's definitely got the same vibe as the last time, where it's getting that pump up and then it doesn't really look like it's holding very well. I'm on 30-minute here on IWM, so the candle's not done yet. But again, it looks to me like it's trying to jump that, and then it's going back below it. No need to be like that. Dale's just expressing his frustration. I know that not everybody loves to watch MPW, but I also look at this as one of those ones that I can help me understand maybe what's going on in the market on the whole. So sometimes I look at it and it helps give you some information about maybe what's coming next. I think this is pretty solid on MPW. I don't have a lot of complaints about it except for the lack of that gap fill again. So once again, it's like maybe it's left alone, but if the gap did fill down here, that gives me another sense of like, oh, so that could be like the narrowing that happened here on this side. It doesn't have to be symmetrical perfectly, but the idea of it widening and then narrowing, this would be a way of narrowing it. That would drop below resistance, so yeah, maybe. So that was another kind of possibility. It definitely seems like everything yesterday set up right below that support, and everything kind of broke really last minute that support, as if, and this is what I was thinking, is like as if the news was going to be bad and they were getting ready to dump it. And I don't know if the market's now trying to like adjust for that news, or if they just knew that it was going to be fine or whatever. Maybe it's flat, so it's kind of business as usual, and that's the way it is. So what's the news is the CPI data. So I did read it earlier. I'll read it again because I think Shaw posted in the group. I think it's a nice little summary. So July CPI inflation falls to 2.9%, below expectations of 3%. So this is the first month with CPI inflation below 3% since March 2021. So that 3% is like a growth rate, if I'm not mistaken. So it means it's slowing down, like the growth of it's slowing, and that's pretty important. 2023 is a 3-year period, so 3 years and some change. So it's a significant achievement, if you want to call it that. Core CPI inflation went to 3.2%, in line with expectations of 3.2%. So core CPI, I'm not sure what the huge difference is between that and July CPI. Maybe it has to do with just overall averages as time goes on, as opposed to month over month. That would make sense to me, I guess. So consumer price index increased 0.2% month over month in July, matching, because I don't know why that says that, but if it fell low to historic lows, how did it rise? I don't know. Matching the 0.2% expected, firming up from down 0.1%. So the down 0.1% is from, that was the big one, if I remember right. No, I don't think it was. That's a completely different. It's on you. Regardless, it's positive. It's not a negative thing. That's what I was trying to say. Like, it's not really any way to interpret that as bearish on the whole. If you're looking for rate cuts, if you're looking for inflation to come down, then it's in line with that. Does that make sense? Okay. Doji on the 30-minute, AMI is above the 200. I think it's just another day to be patient and wait and see what's what, you know? For whatever it's worth, I had marked off the 14th for about noon. And I'm kind of at the point now where I don't really care as much about these markings as I did before. I'm going to have to go back retroactively and see what happened. The only one that seems to have really mattered was the August 9th one. And that's about it. So I haven't really found any others that have been significantly important. And I don't want to say I'm wasting my time with it. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time, but some of the other intersections have been much more significant. So I'm going to go back when this is done and retroactively see what I did wrong, because maybe I didn't do anything wrong, and maybe I was looking at pivot points for smaller waves. That's a possibility. And I want to go back and see if that's the case, because then I won't make that mistake again where I'm like not using like the correct markers, and I'm seeing like pivots, but I think they're big picture pivots, and they're really not. They're really for smaller moves. I don't want that to be like a regular thing, obviously, but in terms of like messing up, I want it to be positive change. So everything's gone a little red. Nothing is like super red. Everything's like down, just not even 1%. It's all like 0.5%. This looks like it might have gotten support, which is positive. Okay. So the best advice that we had this morning was just to wait, because it's been 30 minutes. There's not even like a lot of time in the course of the day. And I still don't really see anything super strong with volume. Volume still shrunk to nothing. What I'd like to see is if that's support, a test, and that's just kind of the flush, I'd like to see it now start moving up. We could form like a more of an elaborate distributive action here, or some kind of like a backup locally to sort of chop and then break later. That's also possible if the market's not interested in moving right now. This price action's pretty much stagnated again at 0, but it's higher. It's at 515, so it looks like just a double flush. The weird thing about this, it came back down low, and it didn't make another high. I need to relax my brain for a minute. Okay. I feel like I'm missing something. I need to add this trend here. That's important. It's just nothing to say until we get above 516. Hang on, I need to get my spray bottle. Cats are starting to fight. You don't need to be laying down guarding water. That's not your job. The watering hole is supposed to be a place of peace. My cats have turned it into a battleground. And I do have multiple watering holes, but they do not go to them. Oh, man. We broke the 200 moving average. MACD's green on the daily. Let it run already. I'm with you. That's how I feel. I'm like, gosh almighty, like, stop. Just let it go. You're not going to get better news this month, you know? It may be assumed, though not taken for granted, but it may be assumed that anytime you get news in the market like this, somebody's shuffling positions, you know? There's always someone who doesn't want to do what they originally wanted to do. There's oftentimes, you know, a change of character. So we'll see. It happens like every time we get reports almost. There's always something like a shift. And then it results in another month of something new. If to me, like, this would shore up rate cut probability for on the whole for September. If it's largely positive, then that's what I would see. This is a very this is an obnoxious morning, and I kind of knew it was going to be a struggle, but in the back of my head I was like, well, we didn't really gap up or anything crazy. It wasn't like a massive run. So volume has gone back down to like nothing already. Maybe that's just a way of testing the market to see what buyers and sellers are doing. I don't know. I'm really annoyed. I think TradingView got rid of their level too. So low, that volume, 1.3 million. The 30-day average volume is only 16 million, which is really low. Overall, this is dumping. Well, it's not like I didn't think that was possible. I'm just kind of perturbed by this pattern. Maybe it was just in the books to do that. I don't know. Average volume 39 million. You know, I think that this was probably already in the plan here to have that move, do that head fake. It's almost exactly like what happened previously, and you just stare at the chart and you're like, yeah, okay, so what are we doing then? It may just be some kind of a wedge action in the end. I guess we'll know if they make another low. So I was hoping it wouldn't do that, but almost more like a channel. This is dumb. Nah, it's almost more channel-like. Oh, that's annoying. Everything's like red by like 0.2%. IWM's down a bit more. You know, on higher time frames, this does not look that bad to me. It does look like on RSI like a top with a series of LSPYs. If not for the fact that this came so low, I would have just assumed it was going to drop in an LSPY kind of motion. It doesn't look like that drop would necessarily lead to a new low though. So I think I might have been right about my estimation of what may happen here. It may be really similar to what we saw up top, but I wonder if it changes. I guess if it came high though, it would still be a distribution. That doesn't really make sense to me though. Where the heck are you going to go? You go down to, I don't even know. Am I missing something? Like, what are we not hitting that we need to hit? It may make sense to me. If it would make sense to me if we came back to like 199.50. That's about as low as anything here that would make any sense to me. Because I can't imagine why you would want to go back below unless you're just going to completely sell down and flush the market. But we would like look back at this and be like, well, what the heck, dude? Because if the expectation is, and don't get me wrong, y'all, I know things change. Some people out there have been very bearish for a while. Their expectation has been down, down, down. Market death, market death, market death. We've been hearing market death ever since we started going back up a year ago or whatever. Like every single move up has been, oh, this is going to be the top and then we're going to crash. Oh, this is going to be the top and then we're going to crash. And that kind of fear and trepidation is pretty normal, after in a period of uncertainty. So I'm not bashing anybody. It's just that it's sort of like a parroted thing now at this point. Everybody says it. And I've been arguing that I think it's overblown. I don't really see where the fears are. And the recessionary concerns are their own thing. I'm not going to, debate that. So this to me is interesting. It's like a flush to the top. Yeah, 199.50 would make sense, or roughly that area. Could be like slightly below there, like 199.35. I'm not looking at like precise numbers here. Maybe I should just say 199. That way we're not like super angry if it goes 50 cents lower. Sure. So this cross here, this creek down here, that would be like a retest on that creek. It makes sense to me. It's like sort of like a double bottom through the 202 mark. And a second recovery below 202 would be really strong, especially if it didn't go as low. Yeah. It's kind of a cluster cuss of lines now on my chart, but I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing what I'm doing. So if that's any comfort to anybody. And by the way, this trajectory line is the old school trajectory line. So if you're wondering, this pink one going up here from the bottom, that's the trajectory that I think the outward S-curve takes. Right now, I wouldn't expect it to necessarily follow that, but it is kind of, which is interesting. I don't really think that was in the, you know what I mean? Like it's not a big deal if it doesn't. That's what I'm trying to say. But if it dropped it, I'd still keep it right where I have it for now. I think that would be very important. So if we do drop, that's what I'm going to look for. So yeah, I could see a case for, I definitely could see a case for going down to 199 because it'd be like a double dip beneath 202, which was, by the way, like we were really struggling at 202 before we took off. So that definitely has established itself as like a dominant floor. And I would not be surprised if that were necessary back testing on this SOS. This is an SOS. This would have to be a backup to the creek. And the creek is down pretty low here. My bigger concern with that is the higher creek that we crossed. It's almost rejecting like right on 207.40. So that would be the bear case there, is like, well, it's rejecting like the higher creek or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I hate to say it, that's basically the opposite of what I've been talking about this week. I'm so annoyed for you guys, for me too, but just I'm annoyed at myself because I'm like, could not be any more unreliable right now. I'm just pissed off about it. But it definitely looks like that's a possibility for a Friday. If you flushed out into Friday. And by the way, if that happens, Monday and then what follows would be potentially like huge, but because I think you could potentially break out here, hit 202, and you just take off because they've already checked all these levels. You know, it looks like they're trying to establish a flush. That's what it looks like to me. So, yep. Okay. All right. I was just observing the moment between. So, market dumping is definitely not completely right, but it's not completely wrong either. Sort of like whether or not you're anticipating it, I guess. Do I think that looks like a head fake? Yeah. I mean, but I already said that this morning, and I feel like there's anything new to talk about with that. This is the 4-hour chart, by the way. So if you're looking at like the indicator down here on the 4-hour for IWM, it's sitting at like 43. It could have a move back down to check that moving average, and this price could come pretty low. But it's not in a place of weakness per se. Like it just looks like it's near the bottom. So I wouldn't be surprised if it came back low again on this flush. And then I genuinely think that this is and I've said this before, I know. I've said it too much. But this to me looks like, okay, yeah, if it drops, it's going to be a drop down maybe 30% or so. I think it's going to go back and try to retest. I think it's going to go back and try to retest 202. And I'm curious to know if it drops it. I think if it drops it, we're gonna be talking about 199. And if that happens across the market, it would look kind of different depending on where you are. So we just need to be prepared for possibilities. I still think 491 is the level. So if AMC manages to flush through here, it'd have to come pretty low. It'd have to go through a lot of supports. So it would be some kind of a major drop. It'd have to work its way down. I don't know how it could do it like that fast. On my IWM chart, this looks really fast, but this is really going almost all the way to Friday. So it's like a 3-day potential downside. Why am I talking about it like it's definitely going to happen? Well, I'm not really 100% on anything in the market ever. And there's always a possibility that something doesn't do what you expect, changes its tune, and then it goes. The last straw for IWM hasn't been met, I don't think. So if you're looking at this and you're like, oh no, it's over. Look at all that red volume. Yeah, it's there. It's also shrinking a bit, the volume. It's coming down really fast. So does that look like a head fake to me? Yeah, I already said that though. And I think that we don't need to keep beating up on the same points here. But the only other option here for the short term is that this is an SOS that returns to a creek. So this is where things get a little more dicey. I don't know. This is like what I thought might happen anyways. I don't know why I'm like second guessing it now. So where would that creek be? There should be like a nail in the coffin moment. I think it's coming up now. That might be it. Where else is there a creek though? I think that's it because they push so high here. The next one would be significantly low. Be like down here. So, and that falls in line with like that lower target. Yeah, coming back down today and going into like Wednesday or whatever, into Friday, Thursday and Friday. So there's nothing really very interesting about that. It's kind of the exact same as what we drew anyways, so I wouldn't worry too much. It'd be crazy to have like a Friday move after all this. So right now we're on a place where technically, like, if this was a bear trap, this could hold. I hate to throw that out there for like hopium stuff. I don't like that, but really, like, that could be a place you hold because in layman's terms, again, it's like you've pushed resistance. If you can come back to the last creek, the last support, you should be okay. I can't really tell for sure if it's been broken. It kind of looks like it pushed below it right there. It's hard to define it because these two tops give you a lower indicator, like it's like slightly below. These ones seem to kind of raise it. I would suggest that it looks like they pushed below it already. But we've seen that kind of stuff happen and then build out a support and then leave, so it's tight, man. So I'd say if it drops beneath 206, that's where you're going to have maybe the fuller capitulation. If you're looking for like a big flush, it'd probably be if it dropped 206. So unless it drops below 206, there's still a possibility that it could hold, because this could be in some ways an SOS with a backup. I don't think it's a very good SOS, but it could be. Not sure about GME here, but maybe same deal, like somewhat similar. It's hard to tell with just the price action if it's come too low. I mean, it's definitely, in terms of this top range, it looks really bad. Kind of interested here at this RSI hit right there. So when it came down to 2209, RSI came back down to basically in the middle. It's at 43 points, and so it looks like a you know, not a dead cat, but it kind of looks like a hook here on this cross that just failed to hold. I mean, you can see it visibly on RSI. So I'm curious on the regular price action if, yeah, there's probably some kind of a comparable measure here. I think it's this. That makes sense. And then this. Yeah, I mean, in a news-driven market, I would say anything's possible. Could turn around kind of stuff. But if I were just looking at this without knowledge of what this is, I would say that looks like a very distributive action. To jump above and then come back below and immediately break a creek, there's no stopping power. That's an important part of this. So in the nature of like just being, yeah, I mean, it looks like it's just slumping through. Well, can't get lemonade from oranges, so we're just gonna wait it out. about to break 1 hour 200. I see bullish Booksy. About to break something is not the same as breaking above it, and then it's definitely not the same as finding support. So just playing devil's advocate to that for you, because I can't tell you the number of times we've broken like a 200 or a 180 on the 4 hour or the daily, and then it's ended up being bearish. Like, that's usually where they do the head fakes. If you look at the chart over the last few years, it's almost always the same. If you flip on that 180 4 hour, 180 daily, one of those is being broken and they're distributing. Like, all of them are like that. And that's been part of the problem with AMC, is we haven't been able to maintain a support over those levels. So 1 hour is a little different. I couldn't tell you if that's been the case, but I know that the 4 hour and the daily are like that. Now the 4 hour I've been pretty positive about, because we actually have I think we've been holding it pretty well. It was below us. Whoa, what if that's the way you had to look at charts? Just straight up barcode lines. Man, somehow this chart got worse, like way worse. I don't know if I should get rid of all these lines. Maybe I should. It's like a really crappy chart right now, but it's measured out. Yep. So that 4 hour is below us. It actually looks like, going backwards here, I mean, it looks like we hit support on it right here on Monday the 12th. Wait a minute. No kidding. That's like where I said that we thought the iterations were ending. It's like right on that Friday marker, that 4 hour period. Between these two 4 hour periods is where it passed above the 4 hour moving average. And then it held. So it's like a double bottom on Thursday the 8th, Monday the 12th at 496. Man, I really hope I was right about that. And that really was where the iterations ended. All right, give me a breather space. I'm going to go use the restroom real quick, as I just have to. Nature's calling. But I want to continue. So if you want to hold out for 5 minutes, I'll be right back. Where is Booksy? He is gone. He is gone, gone, gone. Just kidding. I'm still here. 30 people left because I had to use the bathroom. That's incredible to me. What am I supposed to do? I'm not gonna get a diaper so that I can keep streaming. I'm gonna get some Depends for you guys. Go buy some Depends so I can stream nonstop. Get a Kool-Aid dispenser and some Cheetos while I'm at it, so that I can just sit here and become a blob. Well, you know what I mean? The expectations, just crazy to me. 30 people were like, I'm not listening anymore because he went poop. Because he had to go to the bathroom. I mean, come on, guys. Come on, guys and gals. Be realistic. It's a human thing. We're all grown-ups. You can wait 5 minutes. You don't have to, though. I guess it's fair. You're all like, oh, you don't tell me what to do, Booksy. Time is money, man. Yeah. Squirt, squirt. You want to play in water? You can get wet. I'll squirt you. That's part of the reason why the cats are fighting each other all the time. One of my cats, Beazle, he's our big one. They don't nobody likes him now. I don't know what happened, but the other ones don't like him very much. And one of my cats, Imogen, she's the girl that stays inside, and she hates him. They fight all the time. She's constantly hissing at him. She feels super threatened. But they're both bad. They're both bad. They both have bad behavior. Because Beazle will ambush other cats when they're at the watering dish. I keep saying watering hole, but that's just because we joke about it. It's because the watering hole is supposed to be a truce. But he ambushes other cats there, and that's frustrating. I'm like, well, you can't do that. It's not your watering bowl, And then at the same time, my other cat, Imogen, she likes to play in the water, dump her hands in it, flick water out, and as a result, we end up getting extreme amounts of disgusting stuff in the water, and I have to change the water out. It's not like it self-filters. So yeah, this is... And it's just really annoying, So, it looks like we're going back to check 2169 on GME. So I have to kind of bark at both of them because they both do stuff that I'm like, dude, stop, There it is. There's the dump. Yeah, this is hot garbage. So I'm kind of annoyed right now because on the day, because I think that yesterday everything kind of set up in a way that would make people think it could advance, and that kind of motion at the end of the day, I just don't like it. It tends to be a fake out kind of move. We got positive news, which of course you're like, well, why are we dumping if we got positive news? I don't think it matters. I think that it was already set up to drop, so they're just dropping it. You guys are like, that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? Because there was something else in mind, And going backwards to get certain liquidity checks done isn't necessarily a bearish action. And a bear would look at it and say, yeah, it didn't matter. Recession's still around the corner or something, blah, 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 blah. But they're just parroting news articles that they read from a technical standpoint, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to look at it and just kind of read it simply and say, all right, well, there's things here that you can always go backwards to check, and it's not like that weird to me, this idea of like dropping back through a level after a pump, especially when we were coming at it with somewhat overcooked indicators. I wouldn't say AMC, but GME was like that. It was kind of approaching some levels where you might see correction. Same with, IWM. I wouldn't say it's like massively overbought or something, but it doesn't have to be. It's still approaching this level on, a relatively weak knees. So I don't feel like a drop here was out of the question. It's just a matter of perspective, I guess. And then another part of me wonders, because, sometimes, and I've seen this before, sometimes that drop isn't what you think it is in terms of like a move. Before a bullish action, you might have a drop. And that's actually kind of good. I've talked about that a bit on my channel here, that I prefer to see that as opposed to like a bowl shape run up. I don't like those. Those feel like really bad to me. Where you see that kind of rounded bottom and then it starts going up and the indicators are overheating and all that stuff just reeks of distribution, that U shape. And we're getting that on AMC. I mean, that's kind of the way it's been the last few days, I think, specifically because of that low volume bottom. There's just kind of a lack of interest from buyers in advancing. It's just a holding pattern. So this reads more as a UTAD, unfortunately. The good news for AMC is that range is not particularly like huge. I mean, it's kind of a small range. So even a UTAD here, if that's what that ends up proving to be, and it kind of looks like it, would probably result in a downside that breaks below the range, but the range itself is around 498. So to me, it's like, whatever, I don't really feel that strongly about the I guess the nature of that move. Interesting right there. Matches that one too. So maybe a 50-50 sling. I mean, if it came below like 498, I'd probably say, okay, it's below the range. You know what I mean? And then you could have a change of character down here somewhere pretty rapidly. And that's assuming that we do continue to drop. That's what I would expect, that you would have potential down here for a change around that 491. And I've left this on the chart for the last 2 weeks, it feels like, because there's really not been any kind of evidence that we're actually out yet. So we're not done. The day's not over. And I guess what I was saying a minute ago is I prefer to see that hard drop down and then a reaction that doesn't stop but just kind of has that buy-in and then does it again. And we just haven't really seen that. Every time we do this hard drop down, we get that reaction, but then the second reaction doesn't seem to follow through. This was the only time that we had any kind of follow through that seemed to reverse the trend of the creek kind of going parabolic down. It stopped doing that, right? It just did. But unfortunately, it did it, and then it went into these kind of double up thrust modes going towards 518. So we're still in a place where it's like, yeah, that doesn't look awesome to me. I don't think we're going to come super, super low, though. I think if we drop, we're going to drop down to 493. we're forming a cup and handle. I don't think that's very likely. Really not a fan of the cup and handle on AMC. It's not that it doesn't happen, it's just not the most reliable pattern on this chart. Tends to be read too much into it. Typically, a cup and handle won't go below 50% of its cup, and it's already dropped below 50% on its cup. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I just don't typically like that bowl shape. That's not, more likely than not, that's not because of a cup and handle, especially if the volume is in the peaks only. So you'd have to kind of look at saying, like, where's the volume? This is the weirdest volume right here in the middle. This is jumping a little tiny local creek. It's a hard read, you know. So one thing that happens with a cup and handle is you have heavy selling on the left side and then a gradual increase in selling on the right side as it turns. And it's really difficult for me to justify that right now with the volume that we have. I can't see anything like that here. There's nothing that stands out as like heavy selling volume on this side except for this and this. It's the two kind of heavy peaks, right? And they're both above the same level, which is close to that 50% at like 508, 509. I don't know. So I don't like cup and handles, and I think traditionally, if you look at the way that they're measured, they tend to be best if they're over like 6 weeks long, and usually they're even better if they're way longer than that, like months or years long. They're not typically very reliable on a 5-minute chart or something. That's all I'm going to say about that for now. I just would hesitate with that idea because we get this kind of stuff all the time. And you start getting those U-shaped build-outs, it's very debatable. You know, some person would look at that and say it looks like a really clean cup, but I look at it and I'm like, well, it kind of just looks like a double top, like horns or cat ears as we call them. Just an upthrust and then an upthrust after distribution. And if it is, it's a really weak one. It's not like the strongest one in the world, but that's the way I would interpret it, right? So that's all. It's nothing personal. Oh, it's personal, Booksy. I don't want to change that one. I think that one's right. So I think I'm a little confused by this chart, though. Wonder why. All right. You could be right. I mean, this could be one of those special circumstances. So just to challenge myself on it, I mean, you could be right. There are definitely some things that happen that you may not expect to have happen. But if I look at this just as a layman who doesn't really, if I didn't know there was a possibility even remotely of a cup and handle, I'd probably just say, like, it is what it is. Like, unless this comes back above this support here, it's not going, guys. So there's nothing really to say about it right now. Like, unfortunately, 513 is going to be the level to beat again. Maybe 514. It looks like it's set up a little higher on this chop. So I'm going to change it to 514 because it definitely has a drop off there. I think those kinds of things are fairly intentional in the market. You know, maybe there's a desire here to get bears going, get their blood pumping. Maybe there's a desire here to flush out sellers. So they're just letting people take it down lower than expected. And there's going to be some huge reversal or something. How could you know that that's going to happen? Well, normally, like, you can't really know. I would say that if the indicators are like divergent, for example, like that could be a way of understanding a possible, see, like this right here looks nasty to me, just on the whole. It just looks like it needs to kind of flush. So if the indicators were really divergent, I might say that's a possibility. If they're already overcooked, maybe meaning like you're getting a sell down at a high value, maybe you see something that looks like a UTAD, right? But then you look at where it's like extremely oversold already. That could be just a sort of a where it's not playing in with the price very well. Like it doesn't make sense with the price. It's the opposite. Not so much a divergence in terms of like peaks and bottoms, but more or less like it doesn't make sense of the chart, you know, the price action versus something like MACD or RSI, where one is very bullish and the other looks kind of bearish, but you're like, well, maybe it's just resetting, you know, and that happens too. Usually on our big run-ups, that's what we see, is that you might think it's falling backwards, but it's still in the uptrend and it looks kind of bearish. But then you check your indicators and your indicators are already like way oversold or something. And it's like, oh, okay, well, it's probably just to chill the indicators out before you move again. So it would be an inference of a lot of things, potentially. This is a volatility thing. This is not anything too crazy. It's still really low. So volatility is definitely being pinned still. So here's an example of what I'm talking about, like in terms of like what would we infer about this move? You know, to me it just looks like, okay, I mean, it's still doing something that looks on the RSI like 3 attempts to try to push up. This one is a wave up that did become overbought on the 30-minute time frame, and then it sold back down. It's at 58.21. The last few times we've been really overbought were pretty distributive. So if you look back at the last maybe 2 or 3 times, I guess, it was these 3 peaks right here. And we are in a situation where this is happening like significantly lower. So if we were looking at this from that point of view, you know, I don't know if that's bearish divergence or if it's hidden bullish divergence, but you're getting oversold at a lower value, which is, I think, a big part of this, which we already kind of knew. And I don't mean to say like this was part of the plan necessarily, but kind of, because every time we walked down, we were dropping supports. So we already knew that like every support we were hitting was, you know, an area we're selling off. So there's a desire here to kind of there's sort of desire is the wrong word. There's a need to flip that script. There's a need to change that pattern. And so part of a change in character here would be that we're not getting as oversold. And I think that, again, a big part of this might just be this wall and how no matter what seems to be happening here with these pumps, even though RSI was kept at like 50 on like the 30-minute, for example, it's really quick to get overbought. I keep saying oversold, but I mean overbought. I'm saying it in reverse. I'm sorry. Where it's coming, you know, high. And I think that's just a matter of time frame. So one of the things that happens in the market, you'll stare at charts all day, you'll start seeing it. It's typically what you'll see is that like your lower time frames and your upper time frames, they're disjointed in terms of how the correction happens. So if you look at the higher time frames, like 1 hour, we're not overbought. So that pattern that we were seeing on the 30-minute doesn't seem to be really present on the higher time frames, right? But that's kind of part of the nature of this, right? Is that the higher time frames are ultimately going to be more important, right? But those lower time frames have to kind of consistently reset in order for that to happen. In order for there to be continual growth on the higher time frames, for example, an RSI on 2 hour, it's sitting at 54, right? It wasn't overbought this morning. And then I bet if we were to go up to like the daily, it's probably decently low. Yeah, it's sort of chilling out at 50 still. We haven't really moved at all, since the big move up. So it's been chopping down as price has been kind of going up. And that, again, you might look at that as like, well, that could be bearish, right? Maybe. Could also be that we're indicating a reset. Interesting here is that the volatility, implied volatility, is like curling up pretty extreme right now relative to how little we're moving ever since maybe like Thursday, Friday. That volatility is like hiking up. It looks like it's breaking out. I would even go so far as to say this looks a little like a diamond on this volatility, implied volatility indicator here. There seems to be a widening of volatility followed by a bit of a narrowing. You see that? So it may very well be that that's the case here. We're going to see a big hike very, very soon, which makes sense. And yeah, not to keep going back to the same thing over and over and over again, but I do keep going back to the same thing over and over again. It's fascinating to me because, again, remember that idea of iterations and how they were like shrinking down? And I was like, well, they look like they're ending on the 9th of August. Check out that volatility right there, pinching in right on the 9th of August. Isn't that weird? Now, some of you are going to say, man, Booksy's really insecure about that 9th of August call out. He keeps going backwards and trying to defend it, but I kind of think I wasn't wrong. I think it is just not doing what I expected it to do. And there's a difference. You guys are like, no, that's wrong. That's called being wrong. No, but like, so one is like saying this, I think they're different in my mind. Like, cause one is saying like the iterations were going to end there. That's the first claim. So the first claim was the iterations end on Friday. The second claim was this results in a massive move up or down, and it would start building out. So it's a very difficult thing because I know that, so it's almost three claims. Like one is the iterations end, two is they start building out, and then three is they result in a massive swing. So I guess what I'm saying is like, it's interesting because I think the first one is done, and I think that one's hard to prove because there's not really anybody else that can kind of look at my work and say yes, because no one's looking at iterations and trying to like measure when they end. Maybe there's somebody out there doing it and I don't know about them, and maybe they could teach me how to do it better. But I feel like that's a tough one because you're in sort of a vacuum, and then it becomes very like easy to just say, well, I'm right or I'm wrong and just decide for myself. That's not really very academic, is it? It's not really fair to be like, well, I obviously was right, So I'm looking at like breadcrumbs, and I'm like, well, here's a breadcrumb, and here's a breadcrumb, and here's a breadcrumb. Like one was, it was the middle of that S curve. I found that one to be really interesting. The other was, it didn't do the same thing after. So then I was like, well, the change of characters seemed to happen. This is all very academic stuff. Some of you guys don't give a crap about this, but I really care because to me, it's like that leads into better price prediction and better understanding of the market dynamics and better understanding how to interpret that data when it comes around again. Because it probably will, come around again. So another thing here is like that change of character on Friday. that RSI pivots as well. And I think it's the same deal. It looks like a compression here. So I didn't really look at that stuff earlier, and I wasn't assuming that that was happening earlier. I'm trying to be my own friend. I'm trying to like be my own friend here and like help me to better understand it. I know it sounds a little schizophrenic, but I'm trying to be my own friend because I think if I were my own friend in this situation, I would look at this and say, maybe you didn't get it completely wrong. You know, you need to like give yourself some slack because you were measuring something that's hard to measure and also using a methodology that really isn't quite proven. Like retrospect wise, we've used it and seen that it's kind of true, but you were trying to do it live, like forward motion in advance. And that's a big test. And then the way you're doing it is with like wave crosses and intersections and compression of iteration, which is hard enough to explain, let alone, you know, follow that and try to like predict it. So I'm trying to be my own friend here and just give myself a break, but I'm also trying to be a devil's advocate to myself and say, there's parts of this that are true, but there's also parts that are not true. And one of the things that wasn't true was the massive move, and we already know that. It's been 3 days. 3 days in the tomb. We're going to rise again. No, like it's been 3 days. And if the assertion was it's going to work its way out and then explode, there's either it is working its way out and it's not going to explode the way you think it's going to explode, or you misinterpreted it in terms of like how it's supposed to work out, or you're just missing some really obvious big piece of the puzzle. And I know that for some of you it's like, well, it's probably just the news books here, it's probably just this or that. I don't know though, you know, there might be something in it that needs to be addressed. I guess I'm not really sure. Maybe there's something really important that I'm missing, you know, that I just haven't really wrapped my head around yet. So it's important for me personally to do that. And I know you guys are kind of just along for the ride and you may not want to hear it every day. But I don't really know what else to talk about sometimes because I just need to like figure stuff out for myself. And a lot of people just tune in because they want to know when's the stock going to run, you know, and like they think I'm pretty decent at it, or that I at least have something to say. So they'll tune in and sort of be like, yeah, all right, you know, until I don't give them what they want. And then they usually are like, you know what, you just say the same thing every day, unsubscribe. It's like, okay. I feel that, you know, I do. I know that it's that's a thing. But I was thinking about it the other day. I was thinking about how like I slowly get kind of frustrated with AMC and GME when over and over again, like I'm not getting it right. And I think there's a huge expectation that I put on myself that I have to be right all the time, or at least most of the time. And you do want to be right most of the time. But it's also like your bottom line, you know? You don't get to go back in time and fix mistakes. So if you make a mistake in the market, you lose money. Then the only thing you can do to recover that money is just do better, you know? And so that's kind of my goal always, is just to keep improving with skill. When I boil stuff down to like the basics, it tends to be pretty straightforward. And even now, it's like I'll talk about this stuff, just let you know what I'm thinking. And if I'm not talking about active price action, a lot of people will dip out of the stream. This happens almost every time I talk about stuff like this. So it just goes to show like what I value as a trader and as somebody that wants to do better is not what all the viewers value. you know. So kind of play into that hand or you don't. So when I'm looking at this iteration, I'm thinking to myself, like, I might be right about the first part. I may still be right about the first part. And I don't think that I'm necessarily way off base with anything either. And yesterday when we did the measurement, we found that it didn't look like it was going to be a Wednesday move. That 50-50 actually goes out to Thursday. And so maybe part of this is just not being patient enough to recognize that anything could happen between now and then that may not go in line with what you think. You may think it has to look a certain way and it doesn't, right? So like one of the things that we were talking about was yesterday was that where is that point at? And it's not today. It's tomorrow at 9:30. It's that simple. And again, the question is that a top or is that a pivot? And that's the thing I don't know. Like I can't prove one or the other. So the wishy-washy nature of Booksy on these days is not because I'm trying to sound like some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of deep or something. It's not that. It's just self-reflection on like what it is. I'm trying to like work out what it is I did wrong. If that makes sense. Like what it is that I'm missing if I did do something wrong. You know, what did I miss? What seems important? And I don't want to hear like it's the news or it's just this or just that. It just really annoys me. I'm like, okay, so what you want me to do is sit on my hands? Like I can do that. It's easy. I just click a button, turn off the stream, and only come on when it's running. You know what I mean? Like that would be pointless. And then the options chain stuff too. People talk about the options chain and, well, you're not watching the options chain. You got to look at this. You got to look. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But if the operator is efficient at what they're doing, they're not going to be screwed over by another smaller operator who's got different plans in the options chain, you know. So well, I don't disrespect your targets, Dave. I understand you've got other targets, and you may very well be right. And August 21st is really close to the date that that ape was created, and then it was subsequently removed, the same August time period. So if you're looking at yearly cycles, August 20th to about the 25th would be, those are dates that would be very significant. For yearly cycles, year over year, in terms of ape is introduced, ape is taken away or merged, then here we are next year. So those are two periods that I wouldn't ignore, and that's coming up really soon. So in terms of yearly cycles, it could be very significant. I don't have August 22nd as the vital date, but we probably have different ways of getting those termination dates. So I don't agree that nothing's changed. I understand we're still in the range. That's a given. I don't think that's what I'm saying now. What I'm saying is I'm looking for that interpretation of, I think we're just looking at different things. So I don't know. I'd probably leave it at that. I think it's changed. I think it's evidenced here, and I think I'm just waiting for that confirmation of the change on the bigger scale, because I already saw the first one, and I don't feel like that's something I'm not going to ignore. But I'm still waiting for that second one. I'm still waiting for that build out. So see, this right here is interesting to me. This 2-hour chart. So if the August is the termination date, this is definitely like a rising wedge. If the August is the termination date, it's like the center of this wedge, which I'm calling as a potential S-curve. So that's a good question. Was there a... There's a question to answer. Was there a wedge here? There was not really. Maybe this is the wrong time frame to look. Let's look at 15-minute. No, there wasn't one here. Yeah, so if you're wondering about what we did yesterday, while I was talking about that and why I started going into like a monologue about wanting to improve my TA, this marker right here, this white line that you see on the chart, would be the trajectory into that top, and we would hit it on Thursday. And it would not start necessarily until near the end of the day today. So much like what a lot of people are saying, oh, it's going to be the same thing. Yeah, it's like 1400. So it's like 2 hours before close. So that's something to take note of. And then the August 14th marker also is significant. That comes from the top. So again, as like a pivot point, it could be a very important marker as well. So I'm not finding a lot of disconnect right this moment with the possibility that this is just going to wait a little bit more and then pop end the day and start up into tomorrow. I think that would be a bit silly to discredit everything right away just because of a head fake this morning. That just doesn't really make sense. You know, when I was looking at downside, I was looking at the possibility of targets. That's where I'm going with that. This one, yeah, this is the one that, again, it's like another one of those ones where you're like, hey man, you keep doing this, where you find these targets and it's like they're basically like spacing in a way that you're basically like seeing them pop, like that drop and pop happen on each of those targets that we found. But this is another one that's like at the same spot. It's like another drop and pop kind of target. It's right here, and it's on August 14th around noon. And I don't think it has to be that perfect, but that's where it was, right? So I had this window here that this is where you might hit a top. But I've been saying recently is that these might not be actual targets as opposed to just being like pivots for potential moves to the upside, which is, again, it's a bit frustrating because it's very opposite, because it could actually indicate like a low locally that then turns. But it seems like that's been more consistently the case. Like it seems like it's been consistently like that's a place where we've seen a major junction where it drops and then pops again. Almost like each of these habitually has been the case. When I've found those targets, it was like one, two, one was here, one was here, one was here. Those are all like really important markers, but they didn't indicate that's where you hit the top. That's not what they indicated. So I feel like I'm adding maybe another brain cell or something, because I'm starting to see that maybe we were right, that as you're approaching a target, it's not like there's only one unified pinpoint and that's where you're going to hit the top, which is kind of the way I did it before, assuming that everything's going to point to the next top. But it may be that you're really pointing towards like a radial intersection, which might sound confusing, but if you think about like a circle and there's like a pinpoint, as you climb that circle, you're not actually going up to that middle, you know? That middle is just there and it helps define the curve. That's what I'm starting to wonder, is like, if I'm using it the wrong way, I'm using it as if it's going to be a top. It's not really a top. So you have like a circle, and there is a center mark in this circle. And I'm assuming that like this is where it's going to be at the top, because you're seeing those trajectories. But I wonder if in the midst of this like kind of circular attitude, let me show you what I mean. I kind of, man, I'm going to have to like, I need to go back and rewatch that section. I know it's kind of sounds really vain. Oh, you're going to rewatch yourself? Way to go, Booksy. Yeah, but I think I might want to rewatch that section where I talked about that, because I had sort of an aha moment, and it was like, oh, I don't think it's actually necessarily pointing towards, it's not necessarily pointing towards the timing target. It's pointing towards just like a breakout, because we know that when these two intersect, that's where they're going to intersect on the center. But if you don't have all that data and that information, it's really hard. And that would just tell you where roughly the bottom of the wave is. Wouldn't tell you when you get to the top necessarily. You could measure the wave out. But I'm wondering if, like, as you're going forward, these tend to average, but sometimes they're not pointing towards, like, so some of them are pointing towards a pivot off a center, and some are pointing towards a top. And that's why we keep getting like radically different markers. And then you have to think about how like locally that's also true, which makes it even more confusing, because we did get really good pivot points, like really good pivot points using like local trajectories. Like we hit those on the head every time, but we didn't get that. That wasn't the top. You know what I mean? And so like even here, it's like, oh, that's all there is to it, right? No, not true, because the bottom also has, and this is where things get kind of like, oh, this is dumb then, right? Because you're never going to be able to figure it out. I don't think so. I think there's a way to do it. I'm just trying to get my brain to like cooperate. Because even locally, like there would be waves, and so these would not necessarily point towards a top either. Like they might, some of them might be really good and point towards a top, but others may not do that. They may be pointing towards, like this one could be pointing towards like a local top here or a local top here. You know, they may not point towards the actual target. And then what's even crazier is I need to just figure out like what the difference is, right? What's even crazier is there was another one in that May zone that actually pointed towards the bottom. So it pointed towards where the next bottom was going to be. It was like this intersection right here. This is really fascinating to me, because I think what they were pointing towards is that support level, obviously, on the wave. But I think what they were also pointing towards is this cross, because that cross is typically where then you find support, because it's one of the early checks, right? It makes perfect sense if you think about it, because you guys are like, well, this looks like a hot mess. But it makes perfect sense if you think about it for a minute, because if you think about how this downward motion was at one point a resistance, and that you failed to cross this resistance, it makes perfect sense that this is going to be one of those creeks later and you're going to have to jump it, right? And it would also make perfect sense that if bulls want to go that direction, that they're going to at some point target that. So it seems to me that you've got really 3 different levels. So one is like a center pivot, which isn't necessarily a bad indicator. It just tells you that's where the middle of the wave is. And I think we were seeing a lot of those like back here because they ended up being like either tops or bottoms, right? Or like pivot points in a wave. We got a lot of those in this area and this area. So I don't think those are wrong. I think they just were misjudged as like what they were, right? So I think one is a center pivot where it's like that's the anchor which you're going to turn either a top or a bottom. Yeah. It's mostly like a bottom. But it could be a top as well. This is kind of confusing though because then it gets to like, it's not really right though. It's better just to say between, because that would make more sense to me. Between either or. The other one is a top for sure. The other one is a bottom. So like that's why I didn't want to say top and bottom, because I'm thinking about number 2 is this one, which is actually that's the same as that. So this is pointing to a cross, and I guess I have to just choose to look at this bullishly for now. It would be the opposite upside down. But this would be a cross / creek jump mid markup. That makes sense to me. It doesn't have to make perfect sense to you. And then the last one that we get is a peak or valley, which sounds a lot like this, but I'm going to call it something else because, again, it may sound a little weird, but it's like one of them is almost irrelevant. Like the center pivot isn't irrelevant, but it's like only relevant on the opposite side. This one actually points to the actual price. So this is an actual, what would we call this? Let's just say or let's just say peak or valley target. And I'm going to say trajectory because this is the one that I use the most in retrospect, because it's easy for me to go backwards and look at a peak and drag backwards lines. And so I'm always like finding those in reverse, and I'm like, oh, there it is. And it's there. And we know you can do it on any of these tops that we've had. And you'll see it. It's like it's clearly there on these rises, right? But if you're picking the wrong values, you're picking like localized. Okay, so then how do you identify the difference? Jeez. Okay, well, there's only a couple kinds of, so this is like part 1. I know this is like sucks. You guys are like, what? So part 2 would be, how do you identify, I'm looking at the prices right now, by the way. Nothing's really moved very far. Everything's like 1% or 0.5% down, or no percent down. GME is at 22, AMC is at 510, IWM is at 206.73. So IWM actually dropped to 206. I got the alert, and then it came back up above. So we're just kind of waiting on it. So what I'm doing now is I'm thinking about what are the most common ones that I look at. And there's not that many. So it may seem like there's a lot, but there's really not that many that I actually look at. So on a top or a bottom, I'm trying to like consolidate. So on our top or bottom range, I only really ever look at what I would call a tangent up, down. So this is farthest extreme creeks. Farthest. You guys are like, dude, you sound like crazy man right now. Yeah, but it's not that complicated. Like I said, it sounds complicated, but it's not. I can give you these like right on GME. So like if you look at GME right now, and you're thinking like, dude, this sounds like you're just crazy man with like conspiracy and all this other stuff. That's not really what I'm doing. It's not like that. I mean, it is a little crazy, but these are the tangents. 1, 2. And then the tangents here on the top and tangents here on the bottom, right? So like this is a range. So I'm looking at the highest extreme tangents. That's as far outward as you can go on like an arc here. And that's what these pink lines are. And then the purple lines really indicate the bottom tangents from this range down here. Top tangents on the move, bottom tangents on the move. So maybe that's a better way to describe it. Before and after markup. Those I always look at. And this is like typically right before and after a markup. So it's like as you're exiting the range and as you're entering the new range, I almost always, why did I put an E there? I almost always do that. I just do it. It's like second nature now. And then another one is the cross. This one's a little more complicated. The cross only comes on like cat ears. And at the end of the day, like that's almost always exclusively where it is. It's always like between the cat ears. So it's from like lower extremities through the cat ears or upper extremities through the cat ears. Because those crosses end up being like waves. It's like the centerfold of the wave. This is just the way I see it because I've noticed over time that tends to be the right one. So that would be like, if you had drawn the cross here, it would be going down and potentially pointing to the next bottom, potentially. But the ears would be like between these two ears at the top. So you would see it like here, and then you'd see like the ear go up, and then there would be like some kind of support on it or something, right? And so that ends up being the cross down in this case. So it's like between the ears. So there's the cross, which is another one that I use, and that's kind of the end of it, but because then everything else kind of boils down to it's usually between the ears. Oh, and then there's another one, which is the 50% cross, which is measured from bottom, top through 50% of adjacent pitch move, I guess, like, because that reminds me of like the pitch fan, because it's like you're looking opposite at, it's sort of like a triangulation where you're shooting through the middle of two targets. So you see the top and the bottom, and then you're actually like a lower or higher that came before it. And then you're looking at the next top and bottom, and you're shooting through the middle. And that works really well as well. And that's the one that kind of throws me off, I think, the most. So that would be, for example, like right here, if we wanted to do that locally on GME, you could look at this guy. And this is a good example. That's like the blue one. That's my example. See how that's like a 50% cross? It just so happens there's a lot of creeks there, which makes sense. But notice that's where I ended up getting that low. So I'm really defining all four of these right here. the FTDs. Yeah, I always trade on logarithmic. I don't like trading on linear. And no, I don't think it makes a huge difference, but institutions trade logarithmic because they don't trade really tiny time frames. So that's just one of those things. So maybe I shouldn't call that between the ears. I don't even really have one here between the ears. This yellow one's kind of between the ears. That's pretty much the only one. Maybe I should call it something else. I like the idea of a 50% cross. That makes sense because it's using like that. Let's just call it a 50. I don't know what to call that. It's like a 50-50 wave cross, but it's almost like perpendicular. It's not always perpendicular. It's just that it goes the opposite. It cuts through the middle of the wave, which would mean it's like it is perpendicular. Did I spell that right? I guess I did. Let's call this an ear cross just to be cat ear cross. I know it's not very technical, but I just need to make sure I know it's different. Interesting. Because now I'm staring at it with like these definitions and I'm like starting to think about how what starts up here as a tangent, see how that starts, this would be like one of those tangent ones, right? Where it's like, it's just as close as it can be to like the outer edge of the top. That often becomes the middle, which is interesting. So it actually ends up becoming a 50-50 perpendicular wave cross. So one turns into another, and then the between the ears ends up often showing you a peak valley target. I think the difficulty of that one is that it could be in a number of places if you're not careful. And also the difficulty of that one is if you don't have a lower low, you're just relying purely on localized trends, which is kind of like if you have like a BB gun or something and that BB gun could shoot to infinity, you could easily be way, way off if you just slightly change the angle like a hair. You know, it's almost like that's the most difficult one because that could be so far off. And that's the reason why I think sometimes I use those and I get these targets and I'm like, well, they're good targets, but they may not be very reliable because you're using like a really small, tiny area, and you don't really know which ones are indicating localized trend changes, which ones are local, which ones are pointing to local tops, local trends, versus which ones are actually pointing to the upper ones. So it's kind of tricky. For those that are wondering what the heck I'm doing right now, why am I doing this? Well, I've never really written it down. So I always just kind of demonstrate it. I don't really write it down. And it's really hard to be consistent unless you already have like a methodology in your head. And sometimes my methodology is very consistent on certain kinds of moves. Like I've talked about those iterative moves and how I tend to get pretty darn good price targets from those if I can see it right. But other times I feel like I'm not super consistent because I'm using, for example, like I'm using these three in various ways, and I'm not considering like exactly what they might be pointing to, because we would put a very different weight on number 3 and number 2 and number 1. Number 1 would be only relevant for buy-in, because number 1 here, the center pivot between, would tell you where potential lows are, and you would want to see on a big scale, like, where is the low going to be? Where's like the lower buy-in going to be, right? You do not necessarily get that information in a small time frame. You would only maybe get that in the largest time frame that you could see comfortably, maybe 4 hours to a daily, or 2 hours maybe. But you need to be zoomed out looking at it. That would be most important for a buy-in. It might give you, and this is where I think I've run into some trouble before, I think it might give you a potential target, but it may be a target that isn't met yet. So one of the things you can't see here on this example is that sometimes 3 is higher or lower than where you start. So this could be, let's say this is $7 where it's at. You may come down and then it ends up being really bullish, makes a higher low or something. 3 could be way up here. So in theory, even though I've got this, like, it looks like it's on the level and it's like in a center pivot, in theory, like, this could be a higher target. So like the circle, you know, if you want to call it that, it could actually be significantly higher, you know. And so this is what's happened to AMC in the past, is we've gotten, some of these targets have been really high, but we don't ever reach them. And you're like, well, why didn't it ever get there? And it's clear that those are important pivots, they're important lines. They may have been indicating a center pivot on a bottom, but then you never actually get to that top, because number 1 is not one that's very reliable for targets. And I think that's true. I think sometimes it's not the most reliable one. It doesn't necessarily indicate that you're going to get there. And that's the tricky thing. So those are the ones that screw us over and screw me over when I'm doing wave analysis, because I find them and I think that they indicate a number 3 possibly, which is a peak valley target. And they really don't. They really indicate a number 1, which is a center pivot. And that's what I've been getting at with GME, is that this marker right here may not indicate that you get there at this time, but it could be that that is the center pivot. You can still see it visually. If we were to break up and go back up to the $37 area or whatever in a week, I don't know if that's going to happen, but if we were to do that, you would look back and say, was this an accurate measurement for a center pivot? And the answer is, heck yes, it was. It was probably the most accurate of all of these. And it was really, really, really good for identifying where that spring was going to be, or when that spring was going to be, not where, but when that spring was going to be, right? It doesn't, however, necessarily dictate where the top is here. And that's a big important thing. It could, but it could also be that that's just a pivot, right? An anchor. And that swing could then be much higher if you approach it later on. So one of the things that happened in the 2021 run-up is this pivot point was actually right next to where it took off. It jumped the creek right on that pivot point. That's where it jumped the creek. And then it took off and it ran right up to it. Well, it doesn't advance past these 3 markers in 2021. It just doesn't. So that was kind of one of my assumptions early on, was if it pivots early, then you would hit these and you wouldn't go much higher. But all things considered, if this were to run even into earnings over here, it could be considerably higher, because in theory, that's also the cross. So like, if you look at the waveform here, up, down, up, you would come right back up to that waveform. If it takes longer, it actually goes higher, which falls in line with like kind of Wyckoff theories about cause and effect. Whereas if it pivots early, it could easily hook here and stop. So that's very significant, because again, it's like this does indicate a pivot, clearly they're pivoting around 33.83. That's evident. I mean, I don't feel like that's very complicated. It would make sense to me because that's a supply drop area. They probably have other pivots that pivot around 29.90 and other pivots that pivot around here. Like if we were to look locally here, I'm sure you'd find a lot of intersection on this bottom right around 25 or whatever. I think my goal as a TA person should be to remove the cloud of mystery. Instead of saying, I don't really know, I need to be able to take these and mark down what they actually mean and have at least some kind of like a gauge that says this is more important than the other, this is more probable than the other, this is more statistically likely to represent this versus this, so that we're not confusing the two, which I think I've done a lot of in this last couple months. So this is important. It's like developing a language that you're going to use, maybe not just as a curriculum, which is important if you're going to help other people do it, but for yourself, for my own purposes. Like I have to have a stronger criteria. If I don't have a stronger criteria, then I'm just guessing what it means. So that's kind of what it boils down to, though. Like those are the main ones I use in a wave. So at least it's simple. And they really typically only mean one of three things, which is nice. So that's nine combinations most of the time. And I don't think that it's going to be that complicated. So you only ever have up to 9 possibilities, which you might think like, well, that's a lot, Booksy. You're not wrong. But what I'm saying is like, we can narrow that down. Because I think it probably is that certain parts of the build out don't typically point to certain things, right? So like one of the things I've noticed is that the tangent up or down, like the tangent down on a wave will often point to the next bottom, and then a tangent up here will often point to the next top. But these don't necessarily point to anything else. So like this definitely just pointed to where that next top is, in this particular case back here on those cat ears. And this doesn't look like a perfect tangent, but the cat ear bottom one is a little tricky because it can have some dips. You just look at that major trajectory up. Did that point towards near that top? Yes. Major trajectory down. Does that point to where that bigger creek cross is? Yeah, it ends up being like, again, what we said, so number 1 here matches more with number 2 here. So it's like, maybe I should call these like ABC instead of 1, 2, 3, because then it would be like a way of matching them together. So it would be like 1 equals B and C. I know it sounds confusing, but if I can like make it sensible, then I should be able to clean it up and it'd be easier to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Because then I could easily show it like, oh look, it will indicate this or this. So like a number 1 on a top and bottom, the tangent down will often indicate B, a creek cross later, or midline later. It's not always perfectly a midline, but it will often indicate like a middle cross, and it also indicates a peak valley target, because this is not just a peak, right? This is also a valley target here. So you get both. So like number 1 could indicate a B and C, but only a valley target, right? So that's kind of confusing. But it's both. So it will indicate, the down will indicate the up will indicate the down. So it's an opposite. Yeah, so maybe 1 should show you the opposing B and C. And it does show you that, because look, here's the 50% down. So it's really, really close here. It's essentially like a cross through the middle. Be a localized B and C. Doesn't always, I mean, it indicates, it really is maybe maps or something like that. I'm not really sure the right word to use. 2, which is the cat ear one, this one's kind of confusing because it also could be a valley target or a peak target. The difference is where you measure it. It's not measured on a tangent. So it could be the same thing. I mean, it could obviously, I don't think cat ears typically point to middles. So 2 would map, would help map opposite C. In combination with downtrends, I forgot about those. Those are just trends. Dang it. You're like, not another one? Yeah, but I have to add it because that matters. That's like trend creeks. I think 2 and 4 together can often give you an idea of a C as well, because trends downward often indicate, they're more accurately indicating direction towards the bottom of the wave, because they're typically pointing towards, they're giving you a sense of wave direction at that time. So once the wave gets really extreme vertically or horizontally, vertically, not horizontally, but really extreme vertically, that's a trend. We would call it that. And that's usually a better indication of like lows, peaks and valleys. So I would say 4 also, I wouldn't say it maps it, but I would say 4 aids in mapping C, because downward targets like that typically will help you triangulate where you're going to hit that bottom. They're never like exact. They're really close. Once you get that trend going, it's easy to see like, hey, there's intersections there. Dang it. There's a lot of lines you could use. Because then there's that early one that happens here. And that's kind of different. There's another one that happens sometimes really early in a range that also points down. But I don't know what to call that. Because if it's attached with a sign of weakness, that often gives you a sense of direction as well. So like, in the example that we use here, this is the early one, and it's hard to kind of ignore that. That's not really wrong because you're using both. You could use this and say it comes from this or whatever. But if this were really high and you didn't have another target to use, you can still use this. These 2 points right here do point to the next bottom. So right there. So if you didn't have like an opposite target that you could use to draw from and do like a cross, which is fine. I mean, you could do a cross here and it would pretty much work. But if you didn't have that, you could use whatever this is. I don't know what we want to call this. It's sort of a preliminary supply creek
or creeks. They usually indicate direction that you're going to be going. I hate to add more, but there's just a lot of good things you can take from it, so I'm not going to ignore it. And it could be a preliminary support on the way down. These are typically like intro creeks right before you get into the range. They often point, 4 and 5 often point to C. So that's good. That's like more information though. So that we're not using them for the wrong thing. You just kind of have to keep in mind, like, what the reason I'm doing it is so that I can adjust it later. I don't know if this one's going to be the most important, but it's there. And then but the thing is about trends is they can also, I'm sorry for ticking my tongue on the mic, pifting. The thing about 4 is that trends could also indicate, like we saw in May, they indicated, those trend lines definitely indicated where that top was, but so it was a potential high, but it actually was the bottom. So it was kind of a midline in that case. So that's confusing, because I'm saying that 4 aids in mapping C or B. Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, because a trend could also map to, or a trajectory, I should say, could also map to C or to B, which is the middle, or the future support. Because sometimes they're just targeting, they're pivoting around supplies, and so you might grab a trend. So there's kind of a difference between like major trends and minor trends too, because like a major trend would be during a markdown, and then the other one would be during a range. Trends can mean really different things. So I'm going to have to define it, because so it's either a mark up, down, or intra-range, I guess. I don't know. Those are kind of two different things. That sucks, because that's not helpful. Some of these overlap, but y'all are like, man, you keep adding stuff. I know, but it's important to define it. Otherwise, it's just... So 4A is better for mapping C, but 4B probably is better for mapping localized crosses and jumps. I mean, there's a pretty significant difference in the two. I'd say aids, because it's not always like perfect. So it more is like a helper. And then 3, which is the perpendicular wave cross. 3 is one of the only ones that can really give you the pivot. They give you the potential pivots, which is where you really want to see the buy-ins. I say combos because it has to be like both wave crosses intersecting. That's the only way you could do it. You can't just have one. It's not enough. You have to have combinations that are crossing each other. So the crosses are really unique. Unique for buy-in or like for finding those valleys in like a middle range. I would say unique because it's not, I don't think there's another way to do that. I've never used another method to do that in terms of like timing. I would say it's probably because of that. For those pivots. And those are the ones that get me thrown off a lot because they're not always very reliable. Those are the ones that here cause us to see massive pivots. But they didn't actually do anything to change the major direction of the stock. They were like clearly important, but they didn't make it blow up or blow down. You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of like all right, they're pivots, and then they pivoted, and then we marked them off like here and here, and they were significant. But they were lower valleys on these waves down. So that's interesting. Yeah, in some ways, these all boil down to like just being two things. So if you were just to like summarize these major ones, not the minor ones, I'm not using really any trends here per se except this, maybe this one a little bit. But like, if the way I'm defining it, it's kind of boiled down to just either trend hits or cross. So if you were to like, the most simplified version of this is just two. It's either based on a trend or it's based on a cross section of a wave. And that's it. I'm breaking them down into bits and pieces because like a cat ear cross is different than a perpendicular wave cross in some ways in terms of what they might indicate. But they're both crosses. They technically are both midsections of a wave. And then tangents really are also trends. So like 1 and 4, 2 and 3, they're kind of all the same. And then 5 is a form of trend as well, and kind of both trend and a cross because it comes in the middle, but so it's not really like the trend, but it's locally a trend. And then it's on the big picture, it's typically like a cross. So there'll be like a local trend here for 5. And so 5 really should also, and I would say confirming B. So if I were to like boil this down to, so like the two basic groups are crosses and trends. If you were just to kind of like only know one or the other, and that's there. I call those creeks because they represent different things. But those are like the two basic groups. So I can't color code those differently. It would be nice. Yeah, but that's a simpler way to understand it. Is you either have a cross or a trend. That's it. And then I'm kind of breaking them into parts. I should have thought of that beforehand so that I could have delineated this better. I might rearrange it so that it's like crosses first, then trends or something. MPW's holding support at 467, but the volume is really weak. It looks pretty decent otherwise. IWM came back up. So again, I said that this was kind of like the last resort, and it dipped really low beneath it, but it did come back up. So speaking of crosses and trends, you guys are like, please no, Booksy. No. Well, look, I'm not going to do all that work for nothing. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to use it, you know. It's pointless to do all that and then not use that terminology to help define things. So this is both a trend and a cross now. Well, it was a trend. It's a creek. Now it's a cross. So it basically does both. So you can see like there's a wraparound target here on that move. It doesn't come as high as the trend creek. But that's an easy way to understand that, because then you're like, well, that is a creek. It was acting as a trend. It's a support. Now it's below it. It could act as a resistance. We call that a hook, right? But now there's also the idea that it's a cross because you've jumped it. So it's a wave up, wave down through it. And then you hit a trend, which is also now a cross because it's jumped above it. So these are all just creeks, right? But you can see how they like morph one into the next. And this is the one that we said, it's a tangent, so it could indicate a future bottom. So just to like put this into practice, you know, we were talking about this on a top or bottom, a tangent up or down, which is the farthest extreme, is typically right before or after a markup. That's just the case of like a top and a bottom. But in this case, these are the first two peaks, right? Right here and here. So if it came up, you know, these are the first peaks it made in that range. This could indicate a potential B and C, which is a cross and then a peak valley target. So do we have a cross and a peak and valley target? Well, we have a cross, and then you have a potential valley target for that cross. Pretty straightforward, right? Maybe right here. Yep. Boom. Yay. So then it's the tricky part is like a cross might indicate that you can see a 50-50. And in this case, the 50-50 didn't come that high. It didn't come up to 209. It only came up to 208. But that's just because it's respecting like some other higher trend and probably up here, this gap fill, that kind of thing. But I would have looked at it and assumed that this could be a 50-50 cross and that it makes sense that it would come up to fill this gap. So this gives you like a high probability target coming across this wave. It's not necessarily going to hit that target, but within about a single percent in this case, but within a small range of error, maybe we could say like, I don't know, like upper 75% or something. That's a pretty highly accurate target range. This is where stuff gets like really meaty and like interesting with this, is that you can then apply it. We could apply this for a targeting system that could be very effective. I think the challenge with it is knowing where the breakout is, which is here. So after it breaks out, then you set a target for this upper 50%. It's only a single percent move, but look at the buy-in there after that move as well. It's kind of like you're not getting very much, but if you're trading on like an options trade, for example, probably could make pretty good money on that if you use that in combination with the other cross here from down below. I bet it's pretty close to the same value. I'd be willing to bet it's almost the same from this point to this point. I'm looking at where the trend changes is really similar. So this gives us like a really strong potential target here. So it would have been easy enough to say like, hey, are you 50-50 from this swing right now? And then you could see that as a strong potential since this could come back up. And there's still risk involved because you don't know for a fact it's going to do that. But that's a really nice wave pattern. It gives you a really clean breakdown. Yep. So crosses are super good for tops and bottoms on the waves. They're not necessarily the best for timing anything else. But remember the pivots. So if you have two opposing So let me get rid of some of this stuff real quick. So if you have two opposing crosses, they should be able to give you a decent pivot point. That was another thing I said a minute ago. They should, because if you're right about it, then they'll typically work in your favor to give you that pivot. So this is the first one right here, and that's the second one. And then the pivot would be here, right where that big drop is, that big plump in volume. This is where it says that you're more likely going to experience either a low or a breakout, but it's basically like the bottom of the wave. I think it's correct, because if you look at this from the point of view of just like an arc, this is where that arc intersects the support and resistance down there. So this would have given us a really clean potential entry. There would have been a scare for sure on that Monday move, but so there's a big drop off here, but that's really close, guys. Look at Booksy just sitting here casually developing a trading methodology. You guys are like, I bet this is already out there somewhere. Probably. But I like doing stuff myself because then it helps me to learn. Yep. So there's two spots here that would have been really good for a buy-in. One would have been on that pivot if you were really bullish and you thought it was definitely going to turn. But the other one would have been after it broke out. It definitely tested that creek. If it came back here and found support at the same spot, you could then potentially have that buy-in. So this is then a really concise move, because I think this is also pretty close to like a 50-50 to the actual top around that creek. So again, it's like you're getting enough information here to do a nice trade, like a simple trade. And it's like I already knew this was probably going to happen, because then there was that wedge breakdown. That target was up here at 206. And then you could have assumed if it 50-50, you could have had a nice upper target for a breakout. And then we've got the Bolkowski target for the upside. If it were to correct and go back up, that target would still be in play. Though right now I'm not really super bullish on it. I'm just saying it's there. This is good. I'm going to doing this stuff anyways, like every day. It's not like this is brand new. I'm just trying to like give words to it so that I can better describe it and be more consistent with what I'm using them for. Because sometimes, even though I'm like fairly consistent with these, there are times where I've kind of assumed that one thing means something and it's not what it means. And I need to like keep myself in check and recognize the I don't know how to, maybe I need to make like a guide for this. Good Lord Almighty, man. If I could trade like this all the time, I'd probably make a pretty good chunk of money if I saw the way I was swing trading. I could use this in combination with something like a RSI indicator. Why am I not doing this? Like, Booksy, why are you not just trading this way all the time? I mean, I do. What's weird is like, I tend to do really well. I'm not sure what in my brain, I just keep going back to like buying like leaps and stuff. I think it's a sense of fear that I'm not going to time it right. But this was really simple, you know. This was something I already kind of knew was going to happen. I mean, we talked about it at length, so why not trade it? Maybe a lack of confidence is all it is, because it's weird too, because I know I've done this in ranges and I've traded really well, like 10%, 11%, 20%, those kinds of things, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth on a range with the waves. And it's so simple. The other thing that gets me is also just that method of trading really works better with shares, not options, because options are highly volatile and they can be crushed. So you could be completely right. Like for example, when we went into this top, I was pretty darn close with the pullback here, you know, like I knew it was going to come back down low. If you went back to that chart, you saw something like this. I mean, it was really darn close. I think I was a little off with timing, but it was something like that. I don't know. And then I said I thought it was going to come back up. It was really close, but I found this target at 215 really early. I thought to myself, you know, I could trade that, but I don't know if I would have been profitable getting into like a put position here unless it was just really short term. But this was a Thursday, so it would have been a bit of a Hail Mary. And then you know that they're crushing volatility, so you could get really screwed. Like selling covered calls would have been the better option, I guess. Or selling calls, period. To collect on premium right there. That's about the only thing I could imagine would be even remotely safe. I don't short stuff, so I'm not trading in margin. I'm not shorting things ever. I'll trade like calls and puts sometimes back and forth, but well, there's no use complaining about it. I just need to figure out a way to make sure I'm more consistent with it. So I'm looking at this right now and I'm thinking about it a lot because I'm thinking about the bigger picture and like what it is maybe that would help me. So one of the things that we're looking for right now that's difficult is that pivot. We're looking for that moment where it flips to the upside. And it's not the center pivot, because the center pivot would be somewhere in the middle here. This is a wave. It'd be somewhere in the middle here. So I don't know. That one's pretty easy, I think. I think it's already kind of in the chart. The cross right here, it gives you that center pretty cleanly here and here. What I want to know is the end of the range. So I'm looking for, maybe I already got it. Maybe it is this one right here. It's kind of similar to this guy, but it, you know, it's pointing to like the next resistance. I just don't want to get screwed and keep thinking that it's a pivot or that it's the trajectory exit and it's actually a pivot, which is what keeps happening. So it's confusing. It's all like scaling. Just making sure you have the right scale. Dang. I wish I was smarter. I bet everybody wishes they were smarter than they are. I'm getting older and I'm losing my memory abilities slowly. I can already tell. It's not like a huge deal. It's just little things, you know? And then it's normal for you to like have worse memory as you get older, but I could just kind of tell. Like there's just I can't find the right word sometimes, and that never was a problem before. So I need to start writing stuff down so that I have like a method here. If I'm gonna do this and make it work, I can't rely on my memory to do it, you know? I have to have some kind of a method. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I have like Alzheimer's or something or anything like that. I'm just saying like it's evident to me that my brain doesn't act the way it used to. So I'm seeing those early signs of like, oh yeah, you're not super young. You're starting to forget things that you never used to forget. And it's frustrating at times, but I need to just kind of get better at it, at living with it. I think one of those things is going to need to be like making sure this is consistent. One of the things that was really frustrating to me about that call out that I had in August was I knew it was super important, but the words to describe it were not coming to me. And then like when it came time to it and it didn't blow up to the upside, part of me was like, I'm fine. I don't really know why I would have expected it to do that. I wouldn't have expected to do that. I just wanted to see a creek cross there. And you know, good Lord, look at the cross here on the cross up here on this. I mean, it could not have been closer to being right. And I'm still beating myself up because we're expecting something good to happen. And there's still folks out there that probably are looking at that like, well, that wasn't anything. But I'm like, well, just look at it. You know, that's where we had marked it off, like going into that Friday, that would be the change of character. And it did kind of bleed over into Monday, but that ended up being kind of that final push here. And then it does change. It's a cross up instead of crossing up and then dropping down. It actually jumped it. So I know like what I was looking for was that change, but as I tried to describe it, I could see it too in the just sentiment of the chat and in the Discord group. And it's not that important to me what people think about me, but if I'm not describing it well, then it's my fault that there's not a lot of clarity. So what I was excited about was to see if there was a change, and there definitely was a change. But I think what people were expecting was that it was going to just blow up. And that I knew I couldn't be sure of. Because if that were just representing a pivot, it wouldn't be an explosion. It would just be, that's a pivot where it's changing up and it's not doing the same thing anymore. And even now I'm like talking about potential downside, and it's like really frustrating because folks are like, well, what happened? You're like really bullish. It's like, well, I'm still bullish. What happened? I thought there was a change. Well, I think there was a change. But then you have to look for the new MO, you know? Like you have to find like the new way that we're going to do things. And it doesn't happen necessarily like in an instant, though that does happen. I mean, it has before. Sometimes once the change happens, the markup just goes. And I agree that that's more typical, and that's why I was like, well, maybe within like a day or so. But now I'm just kind of like, well, if it doesn't happen immediately, is it still happening? And I think the answer is yes. But I think we may just need to wait to get our answer, and that's where people are getting kind of annoyed. And I don't blame you. As I'm with you on that, I'm kind of annoyed by it. So doing my best, but I could always be doing better at the same time. Just need to get better skills. I don't think it's about beating myself up. I think I'm just trying to like take it in. So if it sounds like I'm sitting here being like melancholy and all this stuff, I mean I am to some degree, brooding, if you will, but it's not for no reason. It's not because I'm trying to like make myself feel bad or get pity or something. I don't really care about that. It's more because I'm trying to understand what it is I need to do to improve. So the best thing for me to do right now is just to take it and think about it, and then how am I going to put that into an action plan so I don't do the same thing. And I need to be able to communicate. If I'm going to do this in a way that helps people, it's not helpful to be vague, and I've been very honest when I don't know, and I can't really fix that. You don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know something, you can't just pretend like you know it. The only way to fix that kind of is either, to be less ignorant by studying something or learning something new, or kind of like avoid the stuff that you don't know. Like if it's something you're just not good at, that's one thing. But if it's something where it's like, we just don't know, well, we can sit here and talk about what we don't know all day, but we're never going to get an answer. I think for some folks, the GME stuff is like that. It's like we may have almost all the information that we need to have, but there's pieces that we don't know and we may never know. And there's some folks that just cannot, they feel like they've got to keep going, that they're eventually going to get to the bottom of it. And I'm like, you may already have the answer. And the element of the unknown might just be the mind of an institution. Like, and you can't mind read, So you already see all the footprints. You already see all the fingerprints. You've got all the information you're going to get. It's just the interpretation of it. And that comes down to what you think the operator's intents are. And I don't know, man. Part of me thinks that's the piece that's missing that everybody thinks they can figure out. And I'm like, I think it's just an aggregate amount of data. I think it's just take the data and interpret it. I don't think that there's anything else. And I know that pisses people off because they're like, well, there's definitely, if we could just find out where they're hiding all these shares or where they're getting all these shares. I mean, it's probably just common sense. It's probably what everybody already thinks. In terms of leveraging and in terms of ETFs and in terms of FTDs and in terms of, buying and lending out shares, like all these things are probably true. I don't know if there's any more deeper answers to it. And if it's true and it's happening, then it's got to be somewhat legal, which is another thing that pisses people off because they're like, well, it shouldn't be legal. And I'm like, yeah, but obviously if it's happening everywhere and the SEC is not cracking down on it, it's clearly either illegal or it's really easy to get away with, and therefore it's not going to change. So if it's a legal practice to do that, then you can't just wish it away. And even finding more information wouldn't change anything. It would just enable you maybe to like potentially, get in at the right time. And I'm like, yeah, but people have already been doing that for generations. It's called TA. It's called, analysis. The reason you can't be a financial advisor because people go to school for that kind of thing so that they're more efficient at it and they're licensed or whatever, because then they're protected by law or whatever from certain things. And they can do certain things with people's money, that kind of stuff. But I think that on the whole, the data, the knowledge that you want is probably available to everybody. Like a financial advisor, I don't believe has access to any more information. I think it's condensed into a curriculum that makes it easier for them to learn. And then they learn it, and then they become licensed. I mean, like, that's the difference. It's just saying, like, yes, I've learned this. I know all the ins and outs. So on and so forth. Beyond the theory, right? Just the mechanics of it. they're going to learn all the mechanics. But I think you could learn all the mechanics, and I could learn all the mechanics. It's like any profession. Like, no one's going to let you be a nuclear engineer if you haven't gone to school to do it. But technically, like, is the information there? Could you go learn everything that a nuclear engineer learned? Yeah, I think so. I think it would be really hard to do it on your own, without a teacher or an education program. And that's why you pay for education. So, anyways. Today is a kind of a crappy day because we were hoping again for something big and nothing big happened. But the day is not over. We'll see what happens by the end of the day. I've got on my chart a pretty strong potential for a move into tomorrow, which would start near the close today. We'll see what happens with that. If it doesn't pan out, then I'm going to have to go back and make sure I understand what it is I was looking at. And if it only represented a pivot, then I've got to make sure I make a strong effort to not just glaze over it, but to include it in kind of the data that I've been looking at and saying yes, this is something I need to get better at and make sure that I'm not confusing for one thing or another so that we don't have that kind of confusion in the future. If you ask me, I'd say AMC right now, to me, looks like these are all top wave pivots, right here. These are all tangents, top tangents, top tangents, top tangents. So I think that it looks to me like that would indicate where you're going to go potentially. And a top tangent is probably going to represent more of a creek break than anything else. But when we're looking at this, it often will map that cross and so that to me would be really important, because if we're right about that, this could indicate where you jump over and then pivot upward, right? And it's a little confusing, but it's kind of both. If you think about it, it makes perfect sense, because this would be aiming towards the jump here on the wave for this wave and for this wave and for this wave and for this wave. And then you'd come back down to check it, and that would be your SOS. It's pretty straightforward. So if it's going to happen based on the tangents, that's where it would be, those upper tangents that are facing upward. They're also kind of tied into the cross. And the cross, again, indicates future peaks and valleys. So this could be a peak at 570, or it could also be a cross. It could be both. We don't really know. But at least then we have one of two options. It doesn't make a lot of sense as a pivot to me. I don't think that much stuff indicates pivots. That's where I'm kind of a little lost, because those are the ones that keep coming up. And I'm really, these 50-50 crosses seem to be the only thing that indicate strong pivot points. And I don't know if that's what we're seeing here. It doesn't really make sense to me if that's what we're seeing here. So, yeah. So I'm going to sort of rest on that for now. I'll come back later. I have to take a longer lunch break because I got to run some errands this afternoon. I will be back for close the last hour. I'll be back before then. I won't be back super early. On the whole, I would say that today looks like kind of what I expected after seeing the close yesterday, meaning it was a head fake of sorts, at least temporarily. And it looks to me like this is just a UTAD kind of motion at the moment, like a hook. So I think we were right about that. So just a hooking action, and then it's going to try to drop through again. So 505 does not bode well to me. I don't think it's going to necessarily hold. So then the question again might be well, what the heck are you talking about then? You said it was a change of character here, and it did go up. Now it's going back down. Well, that's just a matter of like flushing, and I don't know the answer yet. I think that we're going to find out pronto. I don't think we're going to have to wait very long. So this makes sense to me, as a UTAD kind of moment. We've got the targets below. We'll see if the volume really picks up here, but I don't think that this is way out of left field. Some of y'all are going to feel like it is because, again, maybe the misunderstanding of like what this change of character could mean. But I also feel that there's things that happened here that were kind of evidence of distribution. So again, I mentioned it last night in the Discord because everyone was asking about, well, what do we make of this? And I'm like, kind of looks distributive because you're just pumping into close. You don't really have any indication of this holding support. You'd have to wait till today. It looks like a UTAD kind of motion with the U shape. And, at that venture, we just look at a cross trend here and we say, okay, well, it jumped back over here, the creek. So it could come back pretty low, down to check this guy. We have a breakdown target as well here that I think is important that may play into this, and that also gets you to 494. And 494 is this liquidity down here. So it's a shelf. It's a check on this shelf that we kind of jumped over, kind of found support, kind of didn't. And then there's going to be plenty of folks that are talking about that gap at 480s. I think it's a possibility. It would represent kind of a sell-through if that happened. We have to see what happens when we get here, but I don't think it's out of the question. So I've kept these numbers for a while. I think they're essentially like 50-50-50 intervals now. It's a matter of what breaks and what doesn't, But I think that this makes sense to me because of what happened here on this top. Am I happy that happened? No. But there's not been a single step here where we've managed to jump a creek and then hold it. Like almost exclusively, every time we've kind of advanced, we've come back down and like pushed below it almost immediately. So the stopping power isn't there yet. I don't need to be any more specific than that, than just to say like, this seems like a possibility. This seems probable to me. This is a support. This is a target. It doesn't seem out of the question. I don't think it's inevitable. Like, I don't think it has to happen necessarily, but it looks like that's the way it's positioning. Like, to go ahead and make that flush down. If that resets all the RSI on higher time frames or whatever, so be it. Great. In terms of like that 4 hour, that's where things are going to get kind of dicey. You get to that 4 hour EMA. I think you don't really want to flush through that. And then again, it's like people will say, well, what's the difference? I don't see what happened. Nothing changed. It just looks like another triple top here that's going to break through. I would just say like we need to just be patient because this one hasn't actually broken down on the higher time frames. So it's got room. I mean, it has plenty of space right here on the 4 hour. You could come down to 491, no problem. And it would probably be fine in terms of being like above here. So if we're right about this being like a change and there is a distinct change, that might be it. And even still, it's like, so what if it comes below? Maybe it does need to come back down and get to another check and reset. But coming down to like 481 and resetting RSI really low could be very beneficial for us. So maybe the biggest concern I have right this moment is this 4 hour. So I marked 506 as the level. And we're sitting at 506 right now on these markers in terms of like where you want that support and stuff. The bigger maybe concern is at 498. So I'm going to move my alert to 498. I guess I could just put an alert on the EMA. But I'll just sit it there. It should be in the same spot anyways. So yeah, so the 498 would be really important. So if we dropped beneath that, like if we came below that and hit like 491, I would want to see us recover right above it. And again, you have to talk about where you are. Like if this were to happen and we don't see a rebound here, if we drop 506, if we drop 499, 498, you're going to have to see another creek cross, you know? And that, again, it's going to like kind of be like, well, what do we expect? I don't know yet. It just depends on how fast it goes. Faster is better in this case. If we get a sell down that's like really bloody and it goes down here within like a couple hours, we'd probably be in a lot better shape than if it's super slow. Because if it takes forever, then it's likely it's going to take a long time to come back up. And I don't really want to argue about that. It has more to do with that trajectory in, trajectory out stuff. So faster is better in this case. Same with GME. It's like you can see how important this is. It could be a repetition of what we saw here, this kind of 1, 2, 3, and then this push up, maybe 1, 2, 3, and this looks like another one. Like, well, great, it's just doing the same thing. It's going to sell down again, maybe. But here's the difference, right? The difference is where are you in relation to that creek? Where are you on RSI? You know, I'm on the 4-hour right now. The RSI is really low. Where are you in relationship to the creek? These three right here did not cross the creek. They bonked their heads on it. So these first moves, this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, all of those are in line. All of those are below the creek. This one is above it. So again, it's not that the pattern itself looks incredibly different. It doesn't. It's about what is the pattern achieving. If the pattern can achieve the creek cross here and hold it and hold a support, then it's going to go up, in my opinion. That's just like the nature of it. So if we want to see that, then we just need to hold certain levels, right? I think 2160 is still a really good number for GME. I'd like for it to stay there and not go lower. So we'll watch that. I know we're really close to it, and you guys are like, well, that's like right away, right around the corner. Well, that's one. The other one below it is 2131. And I think that's the same as like the AMC level. Like that's where you maybe would find some support. So in this little pocket here, I could see that being like a liquidity zone to go check. And to me, that's really positive because if it came back down to it and it hit that 2140s area and holds it, that could be a really easy way to like bounce back. And tomorrow or even late today, you could be seeing some kind of a massive swing around here. I'm dead serious. Now, does that have to happen? No. But that's always what we say, right? It's like, well, it doesn't have to. But I'm saying, like, based on the way this looks, if it came and found support at 2150s or 20 or whatever, you know, slightly higher, slightly lower, that's fine. Just as long as it doesn't break below, like, 2130s. It's definitely in a position where it's jumped the creek, backed up. It's now on a support above the creek. Huge deal. AMC is a little different because, unfortunately, if it came down, it would be below the creek. It'd have to cross it again. But a similar move on AMC would still look like really positive. It would just jump back above. So if there's a question in your mind about, well, why would that? I mean, a similar move here would look like another kind of localized jump here, but it would basically be like a dip and then a jump back above the creek. So I'm not saying it has to be this, but if you were looking at the comparison, the same move here in terms of like height, like going back to this previous top after dropping low, the same move on AMC coming back to this height after dropping low puts you right back above the creek. So I think IWM, much the same way. It's trying to hold, but I don't know if it's going to. Still looks really choppy to me. Kind of looks like, yeah, I mean, it just, as expected, it's just sort of like a double topping area, having trouble. It kind of looks like it's going down almost in a wedge format. So we would watch that too, because I'm wondering, this could be somewhat of a drawn out downward motion, you know, with the wedge. I could see that as a possibility. Instead of it being like a steep drop, it's more like a casual, la 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 la, casual. I don't know, fly casual. It could be like a casual drop coming down. That's more of like a corrective drop. It's hard for me to see that because it came over the peak, but if we're just talking about a flush and a retracement, maybe. And then very similar to GME, I think that depending on where this happens, end of the day today, maybe going into tomorrow, that's kind of the guess right now. End of the day, like 1400, going into tomorrow. It just depends on how low it goes. This could come down and fill the gap at 202. That'd be nice. We wouldn't have to worry about that anymore. That would be a very steep drop though, so I don't know. There is another support here at 204. So either 202 or 204. And then potentially like reversing and coming back up to the same level now puts you above, again, the same markers. So it could just be a bear trap, man. It really could. And then this sell down could be pretty extreme because the creek is really low. There's two. One's at 464. The other's at 451. That's MPW. So it's hard to say on this one, but I think this could have a much steeper drop in store. Even if it came all down to 450, I would think that very bullish because when it came in, it bonked itself on that before it dropped low. So it's almost mirroring outward that. Remember we talked about it as like a diamond? So far it looks like it's bullish, but I think if it dropped here, it'd be okay. I think it would actually be probably really good because it would be like completing that bullish diamond. And potentially that actually gives you a greater breakout in some ways. So we'll see. Could be the same. We talk about throwbacks and stuff. I don't think it's going to hit 470. It might get close to it if it went really low. I think I had 465 as like the lowest target. So it might be a big drop like that, but the supports that we really want are not down there. They're kind of higher up. I don't really care about a support down here. Like 460 is okay. It's just there. We've used it before. Maybe we need to hit it again. But to me, like that 485 or that 495 would be much stronger. And I would prefer those. I don't really want to go through them because then we have to check them again on the way out. It's like a whole nother laundry list of things. I'd rather just kind of hit it and go. And I know there's a gap down here, but I'm genuinely serious. If we went down to like 495, 496 and we just hit it and then rocket it, I would not complain. And I would not be looking for a gap fill. So just saying. Just saying, you know what I mean? That's not on my to-do list. So it's not that I think that couldn't happen, but I don't know about a terminal spring at this point. If it came down to 465, that's not really like a spring anymore. It's more of like a retest on support. Since we already hit this, it'd be like a test. It would maybe look like a spring, potentially. Going into like next week, you would probably see that like and be like, oh yeah, that was it. That was the last thing or whatever. If that's a double drop through there. But I think we already got a double drop through 485, and then this came pretty low and seemed to find some support at 465, which is the level I'm kind of looking at as a possibility. And that goes back to some historic support levels. So I wouldn't necessarily look at that as like a spring. I would just look at it as a terminal shakeout with a retest on support, and then yeah, potentially you could just go. But it's going to be ugly if that happens, you know. I don't know, man. I think that we're kind of at a stage where I don't really want to see lower lows again. Like we already hit the low here at 42, 41. I would much rather not go below that again. I think there needs to be some signs of strength, of like stopping power. Like if sellers keep getting their way and the shorts get their way to take it down and cover or whatever, we're still doing the same dance, you know. I don't want that. So all right, well, I'm going to take a lunch break. Like I said, I'll be back in a couple hours. I got to run some errands, and then I'll be back. So best of luck to you guys. Appreciate you hanging in with me today. I know it was a little weird day today, kind of boring, but I'm optimistic. I am. I know that may seem like I'm not, but I'm pretty optimistic here. We just need to like hold on. Just hold on. Just wait. Think we're going to see good things. I know it's a little crazy to talk about a Thursday, Friday move again, and I'm kind of sick of it myself, but I do think it's a possibility here. I'm tired of talking about it because I feel like it doesn't ever pan out, but I think that there's a chance. I really do. And I know that Max Payne and all that crap's going to say otherwise, but I got a good feeling about the end of the day and Thursday tomorrow. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. So I'll be back. Excuse me, I'll be back in about what's the timing? About 2 hours, 15 minutes. Okay. I'll be back in like 2 hours and 15 minutes.